So we'll move on to our next presenter, Jill Caulfield, about the blood stock update for South West Regional. So Jill is a lead specialist for blood stock management scheme for 2 years and has 20 years experience as a biomedical scientist. Also previous role as transfusion lab manager for 3 hospitals in the Northeast. And to top it off, she is also the chief examiner for the IBMS Higher Specialist Diploma in Transfusion Science. So welcome, Jill, and I'll hand the floor over to you. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Thank you for inviting me today. I'll just try and take control for that. Okay, so we're going to have a look at the Southwest region user groups, all the hospitals that we've got in the region and what their user group is, and I'll explain that in a little while. We'll have a look at some issues data and compare it to other regions so you can see what sort of volume of components are coming through your hospitals compared to the rest of the country. We'll have a look at some wastage figures as well, and then we'll have a look at the Amber Alert and kind of go through what sort of happened in our hospitals, what we saw, why the shortage sort of occurred, and what did we do in the Southwest region as well. So if we have a look at user groups, so in Vanessa, you may know this already, you probably will, but in Vanessa, you enter your data into the Vanessa, and we also get a feed from Pulse as well. So we can see how many units of red cells, platelets, everything has been issued to a hospital. And what we try to do is we broke those down into user groups or clusters based on the amount of issues that are sent out to hospitals for platelets and red cells every year. And this is so those hospitals within that cluster can kind of benchmark themselves against like for like. So you can see there for red cells, the very low users are issued less than 500 units every year, and the very high users over 9,500 red cells per year. Platelets, slightly different. So the very low users, less than 45 units of platelets issued to the very low users per year, and the very high users over 1,800. And I've just popped all of the hospitals for the Southwest region on there and the user group for red cells and platelets. And there's quite a spread. And as you see, we get down to sort of the independent, the private hospitals, they tend to be in the very low categories. And we've got some whopping users up at the top here who use quite a lot of red cells and platelets every year. So if we look at the data, so if we look at the red cell data, this is for 2022. You can see the Southwest region down here. So although it tends to have the smaller amount of products issued, you do cover quite an area, and you account for about 7.9% of the red cell issues per year for 2022. For platelets, a similar picture. I mean, London's just way out in front for all of the components. But yes, for the Southwest region there for 2022, it's about 7.3% of platelet issues. FFP, you're sitting at 8.6%. And cryo 5.6%. So we'll have a little look at wastage and WAPI. So total ABO wastage, you can see the figures here for 2022 for how many red cells were wasted, and we're down in the bottom here, so that's pretty good. And if we look at WAPI, now WAPI is wastage as a percentage of your total issues. So everything you were issued, how many of those were wasted, and it's given as a percentage. And the O-neg WAPI target is less than 4.5, and the Southwest region is sitting at 3.1%, so you've got the lowest WAPI, so that's really good. There's a comment there saying, is it pink for anybody else? I haven't done the slides pink, so hopefully not. If we look at the platelet, WAPI, so the wastage for the Southwest there is 6.1%, so it is slightly higher, but you have got a sort of a geographical spread where you might have less sort of ability to share those platelets with another site, or you might want to stock them because you're quite far away from your stock holding unit. So there's lots of things that come into play, really. Okay, so we'll have a little look at the Amber Alert. So why did we have a blood shortage in the first place? Well, obviously COVID affected quite a lot. and it caused reduced donations. So we had donors who would have maybe were infected with COVID, or at the time everybody who sneezed or coughed or had a slight symptom of COVID kind of stayed hidden indoors and wouldn't come out and was frightened to spread it. So we also had that, we saw that with our staff. You'll have seen that in your hospitals as well, with staff as well, with sickness. So any symptoms of COVID, which was, you know, very similar to your hay fevers and your colds and coughs, any symptoms, anybody had to be off sick. And that went the same for the donor centres as well. Because of social distancing, lots of chairs were removed from the donor centres and they were spread out, so less appointments could be taken, less people could be seen. There was also a fear of people, you know, people didn't want to leave the house. There was a lot of people who didn't want to leave. And a lot of our donors are in the older population, and a lot of those were maybe vulnerable and didn't want to leave the house. So this led to cancelled appointments. So if I have a look on this diagram here, now stay with me, the blue bars are this is the whole blood donor base, okay? So you can see here as it drops right off there in the main thick of it with COVID. And then we've started trying to recruit the donors, and then the second wave hit and it's kind of dropped again. Now that line, it is slightly going up. We are recruiting, retaining our donors and recruiting our donors as well, but there was a big shift and we did lose quite a lot of donations. You can see with the red line here, this is the average daily red cell stocks. So as donations were coming down, you can see that the stocks were building here. Okay, and you can also see the total red cell issues. So as the issues drop here and the red cell stock goes up, that's due to inactivity in the hospitals. And you'll have all probably seen that, where you just weren't getting the patients coming in, you weren't getting the samples coming in, and the blood was sitting longer on the shelves, and that led to quite a bit of wastage as well. So if we look at the shortage timeline, so from July, we went into pre-amber for red cells and platelets. And then you can see on the 12th of October there, we went into amber alert. And then that lasted until 8th of November when we came back out and we went into pre-amber. And this is ongoing, so we're still in pre-amber alert now for red cells and platelets. And this is mainly due to a number of things. So we've had a lot of rail strikes, which means that donors can't get to the centres. We've got a lot of problems with our rail and our transport. We've also had a lot of the junior doctor strikes. We've got a lot of bank holidays in there. So we've had Easter, but we've got 3 bank holidays in May, and those are all days, those Mondays and the Good Friday, those are all days where donors can't go and donate. So there's a forecasting that goes on for this to try and take into account consideration all of these things, but we're staying in pre-amber probably until we get all of these bank holidays out of the way. And blood stocks management scheme, we were tasked to reach out to hospitals and encourage people to do a stock review and potentially reduce their stock holding if at all possible. So we weren't sure how to do this. So what we focused on was the ISI values. Now this is to do with your stock holding. So your ISI is called your issuable stock index. And basically it's the days of unreserved stock that you have available in your bank. We were also asked to provide 2 weekly updates for stock holding figures for all of the UK to the Department of Health as well, to help with demand planning, because NHSBT can't just call a pre-amber alert or an amber alert. It has to go up to government to be passed. So you may have seen this or you may not have seen this, but we provided one of these reports to every hospital at this time in July. So we were trying to, to help out and see if we could reduce stock holding. So we produced this red cell stock review and guidance report, and we focused on the ISI values. So it's a very busy form, but if you just stay with me. So we looked at the annual red cell issues for each site. Then we looked at the daily red cell stock on average of what you hold in your stock for each blood group. Then we looked at the nominal stock. So your nominal stock is what you're expected to issue to patients every day. And then that's worked out as an ISI. So if you had 20 OPOs sitting in your blood bank and you're expected to cross-match 5 of those every day, then that would give you 4 days worth of stock. And those user groups that I mentioned at the very start, the low to very high, they all have targets for how many days worth of stock that we think you should have in your fridge at one point in time. And this is taken from using 10 years worth of these targets in place. And what we looked at is we looked at the upper threshold. So we didn't want to be too mean. And we looked at the upper threshold to see if anybody who was in target with those. And then we looked at a traffic light system. So if your numbers that you were holding, your stock figures that you were holding met your ISI, then it was green. If we thought you were overstocking up to 5 units outside of this, then we would give you an amber warning and maybe ask you to reduce it by so many units to bring you back into green. And it was a red if you're overstocking by 10 or more units. And this is based on the hospital's actual figures of what they were holding in stock. So I've made a little mistake on this slide, so bear with me, and I'll this here, this 38 should say 18, based off these figures here. But basically what we've got along the top is we've got the user groups, so the very high, moderate and low users. We didn't look at the very low users because the numbers are tiny. You know, so sometimes it's hospitals that are just holding 2 own eggs, for instance. And then you can see what percentage of the hospitals, so 35 hospitals, they're very high, what percentage of those had their red cells at green, amber or red? We've got 35 hospitals in very high, 52 in the high, 83 in the moderate and 40 in the low. And we can see here the total here from what we sent out. So these are those ISI figures. This is what we found. So 38% of all hospitals were bang on with green. They were holding the right amount of red cells. 44% could move and reduce potentially up to 5 units. And 18% were red, where we thought they were overstocking by 10 units or more. So did hospitals reduce their stock holding? Did it reduce wastage, and did it make a difference? So again, we've got the categories along the top. Okay, this is the increase in stock holding. This is the percentage of people the hospitals that decreased their average stock holding, and we looked between July, between these going out, and October when we went back to pre-amber, and we can see that in the very high group, 40% increased their stocks, 50% decreased it, or maybe 60%. I can't see. Yeah, 60. 25% in the high increased it, but 75% of those hospitals managed to decrease their stock holding. Some remained actually the same as well, so sometimes there was no difference in those. The moderate 50% increased, 49% decreased, and in the low numbers 71 increased and 29% decreased. Now we think those low numbers were due to, at the time, some of the private hospitals were actually taking on cases for the hospitals to try and you know, look at the surgeries and everything that was missed when we tried to catch up post-COVID. So a lot of cases were sent to some of the private hospitals, and obviously they had a stock for those surgeries that were going to take place there. But on average, 50% increased and 50% decreased their stocks. But we had a net change of 328 units of red cells that were being stocked in hospital blood banks every day during the shortage, which did help massively. So before the Amber Alert was called, there was almost 20,000 units sitting in hospital blood banks across the UK at one time. You can see the blue bars here. This is the stock holding. This is the total stock. Okay, you can see where the Amber Alert was called there. And you've got the green line, the green, amber and red line. We're using this axis down the side here. And they are for OPOS holding, ONEG and APOS. But you can see that this was the average sort of stock holding before the Amber Alert hit. We've got the Amber Alert called in the October, and you can see how the stocks reduced dramatically there. And then they've slowly started to build up, but they're not back to where they were pre-COVID either. So that's great. So it dropped. The lowest it dropped to was about 16,400, and there's currently around 18,600 units in the UK at the moment, where it was well over 20,000 at one point before COVID. So when we're looking at wastage as well, we looked over 2 different time periods. So this would allow for any time for people to readjust. Wastage sometimes takes a long time to accrue and for it to be accounted for. So our other recommendations that influenced the factors was things like PBM initiatives were being pushed. We had communications going out from NHSBT at the time as well about conserving our stocks. And it's presented as a WAPI, this one, so your wastage is a percentage of the issues as well. So we looked at the green to pre-amber phase to see what the wastage was like. And then we looked from the pre-amber to the amber phase as well. So those are the time periods. So we looked at normal time, well, as normal as it can be for COVID, for October 21 to July 22. And then from August, when the pre-amber was called, to September. And then when the amber was called, between September and the October time. So what we've got here is we've got the 2 different periods. So these are all, this is the percentage of hospitals who reduced their wastage during each phase. So this is the green to pre-amber phase for the very high, moderate and low users, and then the pre-amber to amber phase. So the chart shows the total percentage there. So you can see that WAPI or wastage was reduced overall in 60% in hospitals during the green to pre-amber phase, and then a further 60% from the pre-amber to amber phase as well. Hospitals that increased their WAPI, well, it was increased in 34% of hospitals during the green to pre-amber phase, and it also increased slightly by 25% from the pre-amber to amber phase. And those hospitals had no change. You can see there was no change there in wastage in 6% of the hospitals. But the main areas where there's been no change is in the low users. So if you think they've got a very small stock holding and potentially couldn't reduce any stocks further than what they could for what they were holding. And the wastage there was 15%, remained the same in the pre-amber phase as well. So overall, more hospitals did reduce their stock holding, and the majority was seen in the high user groups. Increases were perhaps due to amalgamated services and attempts to recover post-COVID. There was a reduction in WAPI seen in both phases, and stocks are recovering. So we're currently still in pre-amber due to the ongoing strikes and bank holidays, as I mentioned earlier, but we are starting to recruit those stocks. Stock holding is increasing, but not at the pre-COVID levels. And it's just a huge thanks to all the hospitals for their support as well. And it's just to say that it is really important to review your stock levels regularly, or at least annually, or particularly after something big like the pandemic. To be honest, a lot of stocks needed to be reviewed. So that's just an important message there. And that's all from me. Thank you very much.